On today's show, a game report on 2023 NHL draft eligible prospect Ethan Gauthier's latest game for the Sherbrooke Phoenix, and I answer some questions off Twitter, one of which was so interesting it deserved its own segment. All coming up on Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
And welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects. I'm Hadi Kalakash, a scout and analyst on multiple platforms, including this one. Before we continue, just make sure to drop a like and subscribe if you like the content. And make sure to follow us on all social media platforms to keep up with the podcast as they come out. Make sure to make us your first listen of the day. It's much appreciated. So first, I'm going to present to you my system when I'm scouting games. So I've scouted a game yesterday that was between the Sherbrooke Phoenix and the Val d'Or. That's a game that 2023 NHL draft prospect Ethan Gauthier played in. I'm going to be breaking down some of his play and how he's looked in that game. It's a game that the Phoenix won 6-0, and I'm going to be breaking down some of their particularities as a team and how that affects Ethan Gauthier's game. And I'm going to look at a couple other players from their roster that were also interesting that I felt I needed to note. So that's segment one. Then we're going to answer some questions from our listeners that have been submitted on Twitter. If you aren't following me on Twitter, my handle is right under my face right there. If you're watching on YouTube, if you're listening to it on an audio platform, it's Hattie K underscore scouting. You'll also find it in the description of the podcast. So make sure to follow me there. Sometimes I post some question tweets in order for you to submit your questions and have them answered on the show. So it's always much appreciated to have your follows. You can also follow Locked On NHL Prospects at LO underscore NHL Prospects on Twitter. And again, you can subscribe to this channel and get content that way. Let's get right into the game report. For my notes regarding Ethan Gauthier, first I was really impressed by his off puck routes in this game. Now he didn't contribute to the score sheet a lot. He only earned one secondary assist on the final goal of the game, but he was involved a lot off the puck. He created a lot of space for his teammates to exploit by his off puck movement, especially on the power play. Now he plays the bumper on the power play. If you don't know what the bumper is, that is the middle position that is in the high slot. So not the player covering the net front, not the player that's shielding the goaltender's view of the puck. It's the player right above him in the high slot who's there to connect plays, to occasionally get a shot off. But the way that the Phoenix's power play works, he doesn't necessarily get a lot of puck touches on it. So he didn't really earn any points on the power play here. The way he earned his secondary assist is he was battling along the boards in the neutral zone and managed to win his puck battle and shove the puck into the offensive zone. His teammate Justin Gill picked it up, skated it into the offensive zone, and then made a cross ice pass to Joshua Roy for a one timer goal in the top of the net. So this was a goal that Ethan Gauthier sort of started off. He had a contributing effect on it, but he wasn't the deciding passer. He really sort of did what he's good at, which is applying pressure on defenders, forcing them along the boards, creating puck battles where there shouldn't be one, and then making the right play in order for his teammate to benefit from it. He's a very good complementary player. He has a high energy game that really shone in this matchup. He pressured the defenseman below the goal line a lot, and created a lot of turnovers that way. And he played on that top line with Justin Gill and Joshua Roy for the whole game. And he really complements them very well because these are players that excel with space, and he has a knack for creating space for his teammates. Those two are also really good off turnovers. They have quick reactions, and they're able to get into position in order to benefit from those turnovers really well. So Gochi really benefits them a lot in that sense. He's also really not shy to drop the shoulder and go to the net. So he has a bit of that power forward streak to him. He does play like a power forward sometimes, but with some finesse elements to his off puck game. He uses sneaky routes to sneak around defenders' backs and find space off of them rather than just bulldozing his way everywhere, like you'll see from a Colby Barlow, for example. Um, last thing I want to mention about Gauthier is he can do really a bit of everything, but he does still need to improve his puck skills. I feel like he sticks to his guns a lot, and that prevents him from exploiting his creativity to find secondary or third routes, third options. Instead of making a pass on the forehand, you could try it on the backhand, might get a better opportunity, a higher percentage of success on his pass. But he really kind of sticks to his guns, and that kind of limits him. By the way, just a quick side note, has nothing to do with hockey at all. But if you're hearing me and you feel like I'm speaking a bit weird, is because I bit a chunk off of my tongue this morning trying to eat a bagel. So that might be what's going on. If you feel like I'm not articulating enough, apologies for that. Um, you can laugh about it though. It's funny now in hindsight, but in the moment I was suffering. Uh, Back to the Sherbrooke Phoenix. I'm going to move on from Gauthier and talk about Joshua Roy, who's a pretty prominent prospect. He was a fifth round pick of the Habs in 2021, and no one really saw a lot from him. That's why he slipped as much. He was a skilled player, but he was pretty limited in terms of stamina, in terms of strength, in terms of there was a lot of attitude issues as well, was reported. But so far, I mean, Joshua was involved. He wants the puck constantly and commands it by his off puck availability. So the way that he moves off the puck and presents his stick, it sort of commands the puck. So the puck really gravitates around him a lot. He's also he's also got this uncanny knack for always finding space in the offensive zone away from the puck. So he'll funnel up towards his defenders and then sneak down the ice behind opponents' backs in order to sort of find that open space off the puck on the cross ice pass. He does benefit from a lot of cross ice passes, and it's not because his teammates are exceptionally good at playmaking. It's really because he's exceptionally good at finding space. Um, so that's something I really, really like about him. But something that I really think he needs to work on is he doesn't really make the best decisions on the puck. So off the puck to find space and then exploit that space, he's good. But as soon as he's got the puck and it starts from a position where he can't shoot and score, um, that's when it gets sort of muddy for him. I've often seen him try Hail Mary passes through multiple feet that don't connect. I've seen him take a lot of low percentage shots, especially on the power play. And I think just taking one step backwards to take two step forwards offensively would sort of be a very important teaching for him because he tends to accelerate a lot of those passes through lanes that aren't open, and tends to shoot on opponents a lot. So he'll get a lot of block shots against. Um, so that kind of is part of the issue with Roy is that I don't see him necessarily being the most aware player of his surroundings. I don't necessarily see him as a player who is going to take pucks from bad areas to good areas. Who needs to be paired to the player who will do that because he benefits from good areas extremely well. But when it comes to creating something out of nothing, you don't really get that from Roy. So this is pretty much what sums up the strengths and weaknesses of Roy's game. It was especially evident at the World Juniors when he played with Connor Bedard. Bedard is really good at taking bad situations and turning them into good ones, and he was a good pair for Roy. But Roy wasn't keeping up offensively and seemed kind of out of his depth playing with a player that good. So there's limits to Roy's game. I still think he's got the talent, the skill, and the off puck movement to be a very good third line center or a decent second line winger somewhere like a middle six. I don't think he's going to play center in a top six, but as a winger, he could have a decent effect on in a middle six role playing against weaker competition. If you got a really really strong first line that's taking a lot of minutes, I would see Roy sort of slot in there. Now, we're going to move on to the questions from our followers in the next segment after these messages. Do you like betting? BetOnline.net is your number one source for any wager that interests you. From the NFL to the NBA to the MLB and even NCAA football, UFC, golf, anything you like, they have you covered. You can find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in depth analysis on every game on their website or app. They're, of course, a great source for all of your sports wagering information with live betting so you can keep up with bets as they unfold. They've got up to the minute scores for every sport out there. They're the fastest and easiest way to check in on all of your favorite games and events. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. Bet online, where the game starts. All right, so let's get right into the questions that were submitted by the listeners of this podcast. Thank you very much for submitting your questions. And again, if you haven't so far, make sure to like and subscribe and reach us on any other platforms. If you have more questions you want to submit and ask for next episode. So, for the first question that I've highlighted so far came from Frank B on Twitter. He asks me how many of the 2023 draftees go straight to the NHL. Last 2 years haven't been banner years for that. Thanks. Well, first, thank you, Frank, for submitting your question. I think it's a really interesting one, and I wanted to highlight it and give a bit more detail on why I think there are three players in the 2023 NHL draft that'll be um, guaranteed NHLers from the get go. So the first, obviously, naturally, is Connor Bedard. To me, Bedard's pace of play, his vision, his skill set is going to allow him to have an immediate impact from the get go. And I think he's even very likely to win the Calder Trophy. I think that he might be able to put up an exceptional rookie season and carry that into the rest of his career. I think he's that good. So don't be surprised at all to see Connor Bedard be in the NHL this time next year. So that's for Bedard. I think it's pretty obvious at that point what I think of Bedard. But the next player, Adam Fantilli, to me, is also very much likely to be playing in the NHL in this first year. I've said it before, but Adam Fantilli to me in any other draft year would be a first overall pick. Even dating back to 2018, I'm pretty sure I would put him first overall. It's a debate between him and Jack Hughes. I'm that high on Fantilli, and I think he's that good, but I think Jack Hughes just slightly outpaces him in terms of talent. So I still think Fantilli's a fantastic prospect, but honestly, if you go back, 2, 3 years, he would be the first overall pick in all of those drafts combined if Connor Bedard and Matvei Michkov don't exist. Um, Size, speed, skill, all that's already at an AHL level. He's going to be a force on the power play as well. I would not be surprised at all to see him in a top six from the get go. He's probably going to impress a lot of people, especially given the fact that he's doing what he's doing right now as a 17-year-old against NCAA competition, which ranges anywhere from 18 to 24 years old. It's extremely impressive. So I really like what I'm seeing from Fantilli, and I see an NHL ready prospect in him. And moving on, the last player that I think is a lock to be an NHL forward from day one is Leo Carlson. So he should start in the bottom six, but he does have all the attributes: puck protection, forechecking, smarts, confidence on the puck to do well in that position and then work his way up gradually. So that's for Frank's question. Again, thank you for submitting that. Now, for the next question, it comes from Y2 Jace. Y2 Jace asks, what do you think of Sean Farrell's potential, and what are the chances that he reaches that potential? So, Sean Farrell is one of my favorite prospects in the entire league. He's a prospect of the Montreal Canadiens. They drafted him pretty late, I think in the 124th overall position in 2020. Um, Farrell is outstandingly smart. I think he's one of the smartest players outside of the NHL right now. Um, Understands the game at a really high level. You talk about a player who has a gravitational pull, who pulls players towards him to open up space behind him. Um, he's a player who he can pass through sticks like they don't exist. To me, I see a top six forward in Sean Farrell's future. He does have, I think, the potential to be a secondary player on a top line, but not on a good team. For me, this is a player who's probably going to be playing in the top six eventually someday. Just the amount of strength, the amount of intelligence, the amount of advanced understanding, anticipation, prediction of teammates and opponents' routes, the way that he's able to just thread passes like almost nobody else I've seen. There's a lot of talent and skill here, and I think that Farrell has the package to put it together. And Adam Nicholas, Habs development coach, the director of player development and in Montreal system, he is of the opinion that Sean Farrell is a special prospect and has been working a lot with him on improving some of the elements of his game that will need improving. His ability to play within contact, his ability to initiate contact in puck battles, stuff like that. So I see a bright future for Farrell, but I think he won't be a sort of an elite player. I think he'll be a decent top six player. Moving on from Y2Jace's question again, thank you for submitting that. Horace Rondak asks, not sure if they're still considered prospects, but what do you see as updated ceilings for Alexis Lafreniere and Quinton Byfield? Tough question. For me, Lafreniere is not influencing his teammates' play. He's letting himself being influenced by their play, and that's limiting his game a tiny bit. Now, if you look at a prospect like Quentin Byfield, I think for him it's the opposite. Byfield is influencing his teammates' play, and he's affecting them in a sense that he will force them to go to certain areas by throwing passes in certain areas and sort of Jedi mind trick them into going into the right areas. For me, as I mentioned before, that's a sign of hockey sense. Lafreniere, I see as a very skillful prospect, a very intense prospect. He plays with a lot of energy, but there are still concerns with his positioning. There are still concerns with how good his understanding of the game is at a high pace because the Q and the NHL are two completely different worlds in terms of pace of play. They can get away with reading the game at a slower level in the Q, but as soon as you get to the NHL and you experience that speed of execution that's required, that's almost instinctual. If it's not instinctual, it's extremely rapid in terms of processing. It's a whole different ball game. So for me, I think Quentin Byfield has exceeded Lafreniere in terms of ceiling, especially seeing them both at the NHL and the way they play. But it's not to say that Lafreniere is going to be a bad player. He can still develop well and end up being the top line player that he was predicted to be. I think Quentin Byfield's certainty is higher in terms of reaching that potential, though. But it's still difficult. There's a lot of games left to evaluate. They're still both very young, so I'll keep a close eye on them both. Moving on from Horace's question, thank you for submitting that. We've got JD Young from the Locked On Network who asked me with goalie prospects on bad teams, for example, Mason Bopit, how much do you balance the stats with the oh my god, he is facing an onslaught night in and night out? That's a really, really good question. And this is where advanced stats come into play. Now, unfortunately, advanced stats are not available for most prospect leagues. If you're looking at the CHL, um, they do have some advanced stats, but not the ones that I'm looking for when it comes to netminders. What I'm talking about is goals saved above expected. That gives you a good idea of how good a goaltender is doing compared to the type of shots that he's receiving. Because if your goalie's going to face 20 slot shots a game, odds are he's going to let in 5 or 6 of them if he's average. If he's good, he'll let in a couple, maybe one, maybe zero if he's exceptional. But if you compare that to a prospect who's playing on a really good team and he's especially defensively and he's facing a shot or two from the slot a game and he's saving both of them, and on paper you see a 930 save percentage, but it's not really indicative of his ability to dominate a game and prevent scoring chances. um that's the difference for me. So any league where you're going to have goals saved above expected, that's how you compare. In the AHL, it is available. There's a lot of online track data that looks at goal saved above expected for netminders for the AHL. So that's something I'll look at in that sense. But outside of that, you just got to watch the games and sort of evaluate that and see, you know, yes, he's getting shelled in, but he could have done better there. His left leg is a bit too high there. It takes a good eye to scout netminders. Um, I'm not an expert by any means, but I do ask a lot of questions, and I have worked very closely with some goalie scouts, and have begun to understand a bit of the ins and outs of it. How a player's athleticism can affect his game, whether he plays the puck a lot or not, how quickly he goes down on butterfly, how quickly he gets up from it, recoveries. Um, you got to look at all of the elements, the same as any prospect. A prospect, a forward who's playing on a good team, with good line mates, might get more points than a prospect who's better but playing with less impressive line mates. But if you look at their games in a vacuum, you start to evaluate the differences between them. Maybe one is a better shooter, maybe one is a better playmaker, but he's not getting those opportunities because his teammates make bad plays and he ends up all the time in his own zone. Another thing I would look at is the team's Corsi. So Corsi is the amount of shot attempts for versus against. So I look at the amount of Corsi against in terms of shot attempts, and that tells me the amount of workload that is placed on the netminder. And by using that as a sort of equalizing metric, I'm able to see, if your goalie has an 890 save percentage, but his Corsi is 50 or 60% higher than the other netminder you're scouting, um, then go watch the game. Make sure that he's not receiving dangerous shot. He's not receiving non-dangerous shots and letting in muffins from the point. Watch the game and see what kind of shots he's receiving. So Corsi is a bit of an equalizer for me, and it lets me sort of determine whether a netminder is getting shelled in or not. I hope that answers your question, JD. I've got a lot to say on goalie prospects and the inequalities that come with that, especially in the USHL. The USHL is a very weird league to scout for netminders. Um, so I will move on from this question, but I really appreciate you sending it in. Now, for the last question of this segment, Sebastian High, one of my good friends, asks, "Why is Luca Pinelli the best prospect in the 2023 class?" I don't know about the best prospect in the class, but he's one of the smartest, and I love smarts. We'll get to that in just a second in more detail. But to sum it up, Luca Pinelli is among the smartest prospects of this class, has a great playmaking touch. Um, I like the way that he scans off the puck. I like the way that he occupies space off the puck. Big fan of Luca Pinelli, and I'm not sure why he's not in most people's first rounds. So that's it for Luca Pinelli and the questions that our listeners sent in. I actually have one more, but I thought it deserved its own segment. So we'll get to it right after these messages. All right. So for a final segment of the day, I thought I would bring you a question that I thought was really interesting and deserved its own segment. So my colleague Ross Levitan, the host of the Locked On Sens podcasts, asked me a question that I thought I would break down for you in more detail, just give you a good insight into how I think when I'm scouting. So asked me, what are the three most important attributes to look for when scouting a young player? So to put it simply, there's one that I always look for all the time whenever I'm scouting any prospect, and that's hockey sense. Whether you're a netminder, a defenseman, or a forward, I like to see the thing that's most important for a player and the thing that's most hard to teach for a player, and that's hockey sense. There are multiple ways that it shows up. That's why I wanted to take its own segment to break it down because I could talk for a long while about this. But there are multiple ways that you can look at hockey sense or identify it. So the first one for skaters and especially defensemen for me is area passes. If a player is throwing a lot of passes into space for his teammates to skate into, that already takes some hockey sense to understand and execute on. Because you need to anticipate a lane and throw the puck into that lane in advance and right just at the right pace so that your teammate can skate into it. That takes a lot of intelligence to be able to pull off regularly. So if I see a lot of area passes in the player's game, that's already a good sign. If I also see a lot of versatility in a player's passing, but not sort of absent-minded versatility, like, oh, I'll do a backhand just to do a backhand. I'm talking like I'm gonna slip it under this player's stick because I know my teammate's coming in at this angle and it'll be better for him to receive. Um, I'm gonna play this puck on the backhand, throw it in front of the net because I know that if I throw it on the forehand, the defenseman's stick is in this angle. It's gonna stop it. Like if it's thought out, in terms of passing versatility, that's something that I really like to look for as well. If you look at Kale McCarr's game, for example, he doesn't throw the same pass to his teammates every time. He varies it in just the right way so that he connects regularly with his teammates, and that's beautiful for me. Um, so that's the first thing I look for. The second thing I look for when it comes to hockey sense is scanning. So if a player is scanning a lot, if he's checking his surroundings a lot, making sure that he understands what's going on around him, if he's making a mental map of his surroundings, and especially if he uses that scanning to read a player's route, not just where they are right now, but where they will be in a second once he's ready to fire that pass, that's really good for me. So, for example, if a forward's heading towards the boards, um, with his back to the play, he takes one look behind him and then spins around and fires a pass right on the tape. Hockey sense right there. That means that he took in the information in just a second and knew exactly where the play was headed, not where it was right now, but where it was headed, just with that one glance, and was able to execute based on that anticipation of play. After that, you look at a player's positioning within his system. So if a player's using his positioning in order to benefit play positively. If a player is using his positioning to support his teammates down low on breakouts, for example, I look for that especially in centers. But a center who's going to swing down low and offer a stick regularly for his teammates, he's not only going to seem smarter, but he's going to make them smarter because they know that they can always depend on him to be on in that spot on breakouts. So when they have two players on their back and they finally dig the puck out from the scrum and they have a split second to make a pass, they already know their players there. So that to me indicates hockey sense because your player is sort of lending his understanding of the game and is presenting himself in such a consistent way that he knows exactly what he's doing for his teammates. He's not doing it for him so that he gets a puck. He's doing it because he knows that his teammates going to be able to depend on him to be in that spot regularly. So that's another thing I look at. So hockey sense for me is the main one. Then if I'm looking at defensemen, skating posture is almost essential. For me, a defenseman who struggles to get his feet going and accelerate quickly, it's a red flag because if you can't accelerate quickly, you're going to have trouble going from pass receptions to forward skating in order to break out efficiently, and you're going to get caught a lot by forecheckers. So acceleration for defensemen is really important for me. I'll add one more that I think is really important, and it's pass receptions. Um, a player who receives a pass in motion, a player that doesn't have to slow down or stop to receive a pass, um, is a big green flag for me. So if you're able to continue your skating motion through a reception and not slow down at all, not drag down the pace of play, but actually accelerate it. Especially players who are able to accelerate out of pass receptions. You look at Kale McCarr, you look at Nikolai Ehlers, you look at players like Cole Caulfield and Nick Suzuki and Austin Matthews, all of the, especially Mitch Marner, all of the elite skaters, um, they wouldn't be the same players. Even if their skating was the same, they wouldn't be the same players if they had to slow down every time they received a puck. And I think that's one of the biggest limitations to a prospect, both on forward as a forward and on defense, when they reach the NHL, because the NHL is such a you have such a low threshold for error, a low margin for error, that just the fact of slowing down from receiving a puck, because pass receptions are one of the most common events in hockey. If you have to slow down every time you receive a pass, you're not going to be able to string together plays at a good enough pace for the NHL, and you're going to lag behind. You're either going to become a third, fourth line player at most, or you're going to be just limited to AHL play. Um, or maybe not even make it as pro. It's that important. Pass receptions are essential. Being able to accelerate out of pass motions and never slow down to receive a puck is really important. The only player I can really name to you that regularly has problems receiving passes at high speeds and still makes the NHL is a player like David Savard or Jake Muzzin, players like that, whose primary role is to be defensive stalwarts and get the puck out of the zone as soon as possible. But these aren't the type of players that lead to good analytical results. They're the type of players that you want on your team because they're good leaders, because they block a lot of shots, because they'll give you consistency defensively, but they're not the types of players that will generate expected goals. They're not the type of players that are going to generate a lot of scoring chances. So that's those are the three primary things I look at in any player is hockey sense, skating, and pass receptions. If you got all three of those, doesn't matter what else you've got. You can have a poor shot, you can have below average physicality and stuff like that. I think you can make it in some capacity as long as you skate well, you have really good hockey sense, and you receive passes without slowing down. That's pretty much the foundation of any good player in the NHL. So, thank you, Ross, for that question. As I mentioned, I can go on and on about this subject. It's something that really interests me. But that's it for today. We've reached our limit. So make sure to like and subscribe if you haven't watched already, if you haven't already, and make sure to follow us on all platforms to keep up with the podcasts as they come out. You can also follow me on Twitter at my handle down below. Again, if you're listening on audio, it's HattieK_scouting. I will be posting these kinds of threads where I ask you questions that I present on the podcast more often, just to get you more engaged in the process and make sure that you enjoy your time watching this podcast. So this has been Hattie Kalakesh and Locked On NHL Prospects, and I will see you next time.